The muffled thudding of boots receded into the distance, but neither Lyra nor Elias moved. Their breathing remained slow, measured, synchronized in the cramped confines of the maintenance shaft. Lyra's golden eyes flicked over to Elias, who remained absolutely still, his ear angled toward the grate below. Even now, the tension coiled in his frame told her that he wasn't convinced they were safe yet. The silence stretched. Then, a single tap echoed from below, sharp and metallic, like a rifle stock knocking against steel. Elias barely shifted his head, but she caught the warning in his eyes. Still not clear. Lyra inhaled slowly, adjusting the angle of her body against the narrow walls of the shaft. A fresh bead of sweat traced its way down her temple. Despite her recent ordeal with the adhesive compound, a different kind of tension had settled between them now. Being this close to someone, in such confined quarters, she wasn't used to it, and especially not with a human. The thought sent a flicker of irritation through her, mostly directed at herself. She had trained in infiltration, sabotage, combat. Intimate spaces were hardly unfamiliar territory. But something about the way Elias carried himself, the sheer force of his presence, made her hyper-aware of the centimeters between them. The voices returned. A harsh, guttural language filled the corridor below, Phyrexian dialect. It was distorted through the metal grate, but Lyra still picked out key words. Still searching, no sign. Must be close. Check ventilation. Her stomach twisted. Elias shifted, just slightly, so their foreheads were nearly touching. His voice was the barest breath against her ear. When they opened the grate, he murmured, "We drop first." She understood immediately. If the enemy expected them to be above, then attacking below would be unexpected. It was a solid plan, except for one glaring flaw. "We don't have much room to move," she whispered back, feeling his body already tensed for action. "We don't need much," he countered. The grate rattled. Lyra barely had a second to react before Elias moved. A brutal crack shattered the stillness as he swung downward, boots slamming into the first Phyrexian soldier. The alien let out a gurgled snarl as its rifle went clattering across the floor. Lyra dropped immediately after him, twisting midair to land with a precision strike, her knee driving into the second soldier's throat. They hit the ground hard, but they were already moving. Elias spun, a vibroblade flashing into his palm. He drove it into the first soldier's exposed midsection, yanking it free in a fluid motion as the creature collapsed. Lyra snatched up the fallen rifle, pivoting just in time to fire at a third soldier rounding the corner. The energy blast hit home, sending the Phyrexian stumbling backward into the metal wall. But the damage had been done. The corridor suddenly erupted in red flashing light as a klaxon blared through the compound. "Damn it," Elias growled, already moving. So much for stealth. Lyra gritted her teeth, pushing past the pain still lingering in her arm. "We need an exit now." Elias scanned their surroundings quickly. The passage they had come through was compromised. Forward was their only option. There. He pointed to a sealed bulkhead at the end of the corridor. "Service hatch. If we can override it." A deafening boom cut him off as an explosion rocked the facility. The walls trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere deeper within the complex, structural supports groaned in protest. Lyra didn't hesitate. She sprinted for the control panel, fingers flying over the interface. "It's encrypted. Military grade. I need a bypass." Elias yanked a pulse grenade from his belt. "Will this work?" "Subtle," she muttered, but she stepped aside. He primed the grenade, slammed it against the control panel, and ducked just as it detonated in a controlled, localized blast. Sparks erupted from the mechanism as the bulkhead doors hissed and jerked, the emergency release failing in its struggle to contain the overload. "Move," Elias barked. They shoved through the half-open passage just as another explosion rocked the structure. The corridor behind them collapsed in a fiery burst of shrapnel and debris. No turning back now. The air inside the facility had begun to turn acrid, thick with the scent of burning metal and electrical fires. Somewhere beneath the surface, critical systems were failing. Lyra's mind worked quickly. The compound was vast, built deep into the crust of this moon, but she had studied the schematics before their mission. If she was right, they were near. There. She pointed toward a docking bay beyond the reinforced observation windows. A single spacecraft remained, slim, predatory, built for speed. Elias followed her gaze, assessing. Think you can fly that? Lyra arched a pale brow. Can I? She flashed a grin, despite their situation. I was piloting before I could walk. Elias nodded, already scanning for threats. Then let's not waste time. They moved swiftly through the corridors, navigating the smoke-filled halls with honed precision. Every so often, shouts and the sound of approaching reinforcements forced them to take detours, but they remained undetected, for now. As they reached the docking bay doors, Lyra stopped short. Problem? Elias asked. She gestured at the control interface. This system isn't just locked, it's hardwired to the security mainframe. We need to physically disconnect the failsafe to get it open. Elias exhaled sharply. And let me guess, that's not on this side of the door. She smirked. You catch on quick. Before he could reply, a burst of enemy gunfire tore through the air. They barely had time to dive for cover as a squad of armored Threxian soldiers stormed the corridor behind them. Time's up, Elias muttered. Lyra reached into her belt, retrieving a small, sleek device no larger than her palm. Cover me. Elias didn't hesitate. He rose from cover, rifle snapping up with deadly accuracy. The first shot dropped an approaching soldier instantly. The second sent another stumbling backward, screeching as its armor sizzled under the plasma impact. Lyra sprinted toward the control junction, dodging incoming fire. Her fingers worked fast, prying open the emergency panel and exposing a tangle of high-voltage conduits. She didn't have time for finesse. With a flick of her wrist, she jammed the disruptor device into the circuitry. A surge of energy pulsed through the system, and the docking bay doors shuttered. That did it, she called. Elias fired one last shot, then turned and sprinted after her as the doors groaned open. They burst into the hangar at full speed, alarms blaring all around them. Behind them, the Threxian reinforcements surged forward. Ahead, salvation. Lyra didn't wait. She leaped into the pilot's seat, fingers dancing over the unfamiliar controls as Elias secured the entrance. Engines hot, he asked, bracing himself as the ship powered up. Lyra grinned. Burning. The docking clamps disengaged. Elias strapped in beside her as she gripped the throttle. Then let's get the hell out of here. With a roar of engines, the ship blasted from the hangar bay into the black void of space, leaving the burning facility behind. But they weren't safe yet. Lyra's sensors flared red. A fleet was waiting for them. The moment they burst free from the burning facility, Lyra's control panel flared red. She barely had time to register the incoming threat before a sleek Threxian warship loomed into view, its angular hull reflecting the distant light of the planet below. The vessel was flanked by a formation of smaller fighter-class interceptors, their weapon systems already primed. Tell me you have some fancy pilot tricks, Elias muttered, his hands tightening on his harness. Lyra's fingers flew across the controls. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here. She yanked the ship into a sharp bank, throwing them into a violent curve just as the first enemy barrage cut through the vacuum where they had been a split second before. The inertial dampeners struggled to compensate, pressing them hard against their seats. Elias twisted to check their aft sensors. We've got 3 fighters on our 6. The big one's holding position. That's because it doesn't need to move, Lyra shot back. It'll just sit there and let its little minions pick us apart before it swoops in for the kill. Another blast streaked past their hull, too close for comfort. Elias exhaled sharply. So let's not let that happen. Working on it. The ship's thrusters flared as Lyra executed a barrel roll, narrowly dodging another barrage. She cut power to the main stabilizers for half a second, just long enough to throw their trajectory into an unpredictable spin. The maneuver worked. The pursuing fighters overshot, momentarily losing their targeting lock. Elias took the opportunity. He swung the dorsal turret into position and squeezed the trigger. Twin plasma cannons erupted in a dazzling blaze, and one of the enemy fighters exploded in a violent burst of flame and debris. One down, he growled. Lyra grinned. Not bad, soldier. The remaining 2 fighters adjusted their approach, flanking them in a pincer maneuver. Lyra saw it coming a split second before they fired. Brace. She slammed the ship into a downward dive, skimming the upper atmosphere of the planet below. The sudden gravitational pull rattled the hull, but the move forced the enemy fighters to follow, or risk losing them. Elias let out a low whistle. You're actually insane. Better than being dead, she countered. One of the fighters fired a locking pulse, a disruptor blast designed to disable their engines. Lyra flicked a switch, overloading the aft thrusters at the last second. The resulting energy burst fried the enemy's targeting systems, causing its shot to go wide. Elias took the opening. Another well-placed turret blast, and the second fighter went up in flames. The last interceptor pilot realized they were outmatched and veered away, retreating toward the looming warship. Lyra knew what that meant. "They're calling in the big guns," she muttered. Sure enough, the massive Threxian dreadnought began to stir. Its hull shimmered with energy as its primary weapons powered up. Elias glanced at the sensor display. "We won't outrun that thing." "We don't have to." Lyra suddenly cut the engines entirely. Elias barely had time to react before the ship dropped like a stone, free-falling toward the planet's surface. The sudden loss of inertia made his stomach lurch. "Lyra, trust me." The Threxian warship adjusted its aim, tracking their descent. Its primary cannons glowed with molten light, preparing to fire. At the last possible second, Lyra reignited the thrusters, pulling them into a near-impossible curve just as the warship unleashed its barrage. The blast missed them by meters, but it didn't miss the pursuing fighter. The explosion tore through space, obliterating the last enemy ship in a dazzling fireball. Lyra let out a breathless laugh. "Looks like they just shot their own guy." Elias shook his head, a reluctant smirk tugging at his lips. "That was the dumbest, most reckless stunt I've ever seen." "Yeah." Lyra shot him a grin. And it was damn impressive." She winked. "I know." The Threxian warship was already adjusting, preparing for another shot. But Lyra had what she needed. "Hang on," she warned. "I'm punching it." Elias barely had time to secure his harness before Lyra engaged the ship's long-range hyperdrive. The engines roared, and the view outside stretched into infinity. Then, with a final burst of light, they were gone. The jump lasted a full minute before Lyra disengaged the drive. The swirling colors of hyperspace collapsed back into the star-speckled blackness of real space. Elias exhaled, adjusting his harness. "Where the hell are we?" Lyra ran a quick diagnostic. "Couple of light years out. Somewhere in neutral space." Elias frowned, scanning the surrounding void. No immediate threats. No signals. Just the vast emptiness of the unknown. "All right," he said, rolling his shoulders. "Mind telling me what the hell that was all about?" Lyra arched a brow. "Be more specific. The part where I saved our asses, or the part where you owe me a drink?" Elias shot her a flat look. "The part where the Threxians wanted us dead." Lyra hesitated, her usual smirk faltering slightly. Then, finally, she sighed. "This wasn't just a botched mission," she admitted. "They weren't just trying to stop us. They knew we were coming. That's why the adhesive compound was weaponized. That was a trap meant for me." Elias narrowed his eyes. "You're saying someone set you up?" "I'm saying someone sold me out." Silence hung between them for a long moment. Finally, Elias leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. "Well, that complicates things." Lyra let out a dry laugh. "You have no idea." Elias studied her for a beat, then nodded toward the NAV screen. "So, what's the plan?" Lyra's golden eyes darkened with something unreadable. "We find out who wants me dead." She turned to meet his gaze. "And then we return the favor." The silence in the cockpit stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. The stars outside hung motionless, an endless void of possibility and danger. Elias tapped a few commands into the console, pulling up a tactical readout. "Let's start with the obvious. Who knew about this mission?" Lyra exhaled, running a hand through her silver-white hair. "Not many. It was a high-clearance op, only accessible to my direct command chain." Elias frowned. "That's still a lot of people. We need to narrow it down." She gave him a pointed look. "You think I haven't already?" A smirk tugged at the corner of Elias's mouth. He leaned back against his seat, arms crossed. "All right then, who's your top suspect?" Lyra hesitated. That was the problem. She had narrowed it down, and she didn't like the answer. "There's only one person with the clearance and the motive," she admitted. "Admiral Stellan Veylan." Elias blinked. "Veylan?" He frowned. "That name sounds familiar." Lyra's golden eyes darkened. "It should. He's the head of the Coalition's Outer Rim Command. He's also my father." Elias stared at her, processing. "You're telling me your own father sold you out?" Lyra's jaw tightened. "I'm telling you he had the opportunity. The resources. And given our history, The motive? Elias let out a low whistle. Hell of a family reunion. Lyra didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to the control panel, setting a course. Elias glanced at the NAV screen. You're taking us to Argus Station? She nodded. Neutral ground. It's a trade hub, but more importantly, it's where I have a contact who can get us the intel we need. Elias studied her for a moment. You trust this contact? Lyra's lips curved into a wry smile. About as far as I can throw him. Elias sighed. Great. The engines hummed as Lyra engaged the autopilot. Argus Station was a few hours away, giving them time to prepare. But even as the ship hurtled toward its destination, a single thought burned in Lyra's mind. If my father betrayed me, I need to know why. And if the answer wasn't one she liked, then the Admiral was about to learn just how much of a fighter his daughter had become. The floating city of Argus Station loomed ahead, a sprawl of interlocking platforms and towering skyscrapers built into the remains of an ancient asteroid. It was a place where deals were made, secrets were sold, and law was just a suggestion. As the ship entered the docking queue, Elias powered down the weapons. Any chance your contact is going to try and kill us? Lyra smirked. If we're lucky, he'll only try. The docking clamps engaged, locking them into position. A mechanical voice echoed over the comms. Welcome to Argus Station. Standard docking fee applies. Violence will not be tolerated, unless properly sanctioned. Elias raised an eyebrow. Charming place. Lyra unbuckled her harness, already moving. Stay close and keep your gun visible. Elias followed, adjusting the strap of his rifle. That a threat deterrent? It's a sign of respect, she said dryly. They stepped onto the station, immediately hit with the chaotic noise of the marketplace. Vendors shouted over one another, hawking alien technology, illicit goods, and questionable food. The air was thick with the scent of spices and oil, mingling with the hum of electrical wiring. Elias scanned the crowd. Where's your guy? Lyra led the way through the winding corridors, finally stopping in front of a neon-lit bar. A flickering sign read, The Last Gambit. Elias sighed. Of course it's a bar. Lyra grinned. Where else do you find criminals? They stepped inside. The dimly lit interior was filled with the murmur of hushed conversations and the occasional clink of glasses. A four-armed bartender wiped down the counter with two hands while mixing a drink with the others. Lyra scanned the room, then spotted him. A tall, reptilian humanoid sat in the corner booth, his emerald scales catching the light. His narrow eyes gleamed with amusement as he saw her. Well, he drawled. If it isn't Lyra Veylan. Thought you were dead. Lyra slid into the seat across from him. Not for lack of trying. Elias took position beside her, arms crossed. The reptilian chuckled. And who's your new shadow? Elias met his gaze. Someone who doesn't like wasting time. The reptilian grinned, showing sharp teeth. I like him. Lyra leaned forward. We need information, Corin. Fast. Corin tilted his head. Information costs, darling. Lyra tossed a small data chip onto the table. Consider it a down payment. Corin picked it up, inserting it into his wrist console. He scanned the contents, then let out an approving hum. All right, what are you looking for? Lyra's expression hardened. I need to know if Admiral Stellan Veylan has been making deals with the Threxians. Corin's amused expression faltered. His fingers tapped against the table, considering. That, he said slowly, is a very dangerous question. Lyra held his gaze. I'm used to danger. Corin sighed. Fine. I'll see what I can dig up. He stood. But if you're right? If your father is working with the Threxians? He met her gaze. Then you're about to start a war you can't win. Hours later, Lyra and Elias sat in their ship, reviewing the data Corin had sent. As the files loaded onto the screen, Lyra felt her stomach twist. Financial records. Shipments. Classified orders. It was all there. Proof. Her father had been working with the Threxians, coordinating with them, funding their operations. Elias exhaled sharply. Well, that settles that. Lyra's hands clenched into fists. He's not just a traitor, she said, voice low. He set me up. He wanted me dead. Elias studied her carefully. What's the next move? Lyra's golden eyes burned with a dangerous light. We take the fight to him. She turned to face Elias. If my father wants me dead, then I'll make him regret not finishing the job. Lyra sat in the dimly lit cockpit, golden eyes fixed on the data floating above the console. The evidence was undeniable. Admiral Stellan Veylan had sold out the coalition, forging secret deals with the Threxians. And worse, he had orchestrated her death. She exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the control panel until her knuckles turned white. Elias leaned against the wall behind her, arms crossed, watching her carefully. "So," he said finally, "how do you want to play this?" Lyra clenched her jaw. Every instinct screamed for revenge, but rushing in without a plan was suicide. "We need leverage," she said. "Something that forces his hand. We can't just expose him. He's too powerful, too connected. If we go public, he'll bury the evidence and paint us as traitors." Elias nodded. "Agreed. So what would make him vulnerable?" Lyra's mind worked fast. The Threxians wouldn't risk dealing with him unless they were getting something big in return. She scrolled through the data Corin had provided, scanning shipment logs. Her breath caught. "Here," she murmured, pointing at the screen. Elias stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "What am I looking at?" "A classified cargo transport," Lyra said. "Scheduled to depart from a Coalition black site in 2 days. Destination, unknown. The clearance codes are above top secret." Elias frowned. "That's unusual." Lyra nodded. "It means whatever's on that ship is important. Really important." She looked up at him. "If we intercept it, we'll have the leverage we need." Elias smirked. "Stealing from a top-secret military transport? Sounds like fun." Lyra grinned. "Then let's get to work." The target ship, the Ironclad, was docked inside a high-security Coalition facility on the remote moon of Hekros 7, a heavily fortified military outpost. Dozens of guards. Automated defenses. In short, an impossible target. But impossible had never stopped Lyra before. She crouched beside Elias on a rocky outcrop overlooking the facility. Night had fallen, casting deep shadows across the barren landscape. Wind howled through the canyons, kicking up clouds of dust and debris. Elias adjusted his rifle scope. Guards on every entrance. Motion sensors. That landing pad is a death trap. Lyra smirked. "Which is why we're not going in through the landing pad." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You have a better idea?" She pointed toward a massive coolant vent on the side of the structure. Elias followed her gaze, then groaned. "Tell me you're not suggesting we crawl through a vent." Lyra winked. "You're getting to know me so well." The vent was cold, bitterly cold. The metal walls were lined with frost, their breath misting in the dim light. Elias muttered curses under his breath as he followed Lyra deeper into the maze of tunnels. "You love making me uncomfortable, don't you?" Lyra grinned. "If I didn't, this partnership would be so boring." After several agonizing minutes of crawling through tight, freezing corridors, they finally reached their destination, a maintenance hatch leading into the ship's lower cargo hold. Lyra pulled out a small tool, working quickly to override the lock. The hatch hissed open, and they slipped inside. The cargo bay was massive, dimly lit by rows of overhead lights. Crates were stacked in neat rows, each marked with a high-priority security tag. Elias scanned the area. "All right, what are we looking for?" Lyra activated her wrist display, matching the data to the cargo manifest. "There." She pointed toward a heavily reinforced crate near the center of the bay. They hurried over, working quickly to override the security seal. As the locks disengaged with a soft hiss, Lyra lifted the lid and froze. Inside the crate, nestled in a containment field, was a cylindrical device pulsing with ominous blue light. Elias's expression darkened. "That's a quantum destabilizer," Lyra finished, voice tight. "This isn't just a weapons shipment. This is a planet killer." They exchanged a look. This just got a lot more complicated. Before they could react, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. Elias immediately ducked into the shadows, rifle raised. Lyra slid behind a stack of crates, pulse hammering. The cargo bay doors slid open, and a single figure strode in. Lyra's breath caught. No way. The man before them was tall, broad-shouldered, clad in an officer's uniform. His dark hair was streaked with silver, his face lined with the scars of past battles. And his golden eyes, so much like Lyra's, burned with cold authority. Admiral Lyra Veylan. Her father. He approached the crate, inspecting its contents with an approving nod. "Perfect," he murmured. "Once this is delivered, the Threxians will have no choice but to honor our deal." Rage coiled in Lyra's chest. Elias tensed beside her, barely breathing. "This just became a very bad situation," he whispered. Lyra's grip on her weapon tightened. For years, She had been running from her past, from the truth. But no more. She stepped out of the shadows. "Hello, father." The Admiral turned sharply, eyes widening in surprise, before settling into something colder. "Ah," he said smoothly. "Lyra." His gaze flicked over her, unreadable. "I was wondering when you'd finally come looking for answers." Lyra's heart pounded. "You tried to kill me." Stellan sighed. "No, Lyra. I tried to stop you. You've always had a terrible habit of sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." He gestured to the device. This will end the war. The Threxians don't respect diplomacy. They respect power. One strike, one demonstration of true strength, and they will bow." Lyra's hands shook with barely contained fury. "You're selling a weapon of mass destruction to our enemies. You're a traitor." Stellan's expression remained impassive. "I am saving humanity." Elias moved closer, gun raised. "You're dooming millions." The Admiral barely spared him a glance. "And you must be the soldier my daughter has been running with." His voice was calm, clinical. "I suggest you walk away now. This is family business." Elias didn't lower his weapon. Lyra's pulse roared in her ears. "You don't get to decide who my family is." Stellan studied her, a flicker of something almost resembling regret in his eyes. Then, softly, "You always were stubborn." In a single motion, he tapped his wrist console. Alarms blared. Security turrets activated. Heavy doors began to slam shut. Elias cursed. "We need to move." Lyra took one last look at her father. Then she turned and ran. The cargo bay erupted into chaos. The alarm blared, flashing crimson lights bathing the room in ominous hues. Automated turrets unfolded from the ceiling, targeting them with mechanical precision. The ship's security forces would be on them in seconds. Lyra sprinted toward the nearest console, fingers flying over the interface. "I'll override the doors. Buy me time." Elias didn't need to be told twice. He swung his rifle into position and fired, his shots taking out the nearest turret with precision. Sparks rained down as the metal arm twisted and collapsed, but more were activating, their deadly muzzles locking onto them. A voice crackled over the intercom, her father's voice. "Don't do this, Lyra." She ignored him, working faster. The security protocol was coalition standard, but her father had taught her well. She knew every backdoor, every bypass. Elias ducked behind a crate as another turret unleashed a storm of plasma fire. He gritted his teeth. "I don't mean to rush you, but..." "Done." Lyra slammed the final command. The emergency bulkhead groaned and began to retract, revealing the passage to the ship's lower decks. She turned to Elias. "Move." They sprinted through just as a squad of security officers burst into the cargo bay behind them, weapons raised. The bulkhead slammed shut before they could follow. Elias exhaled sharply. "That won't hold them for long." Lyra didn't slow. "It doesn't have to." They raced down the corridor, dodging automated security drones that buzzed to life, their energy weapons charging. Elias took down the first with a quick burst of fire. Lyra vaulted over a railing, landing gracefully on the deck below. "Where to?" Elias called, leaping after her. "The main reactor room," she said. "If we disable the ship's core, it'll trigger an emergency evacuation sequence." Elias gave her a sharp look. "You're planning to crash this thing?" Lyra grinned. "Not crash, just make it too unstable for anyone to stick around." Elias sighed. "I really need to stop being surprised by your insanity." They rounded a corner and skidded to a stop. A squad of coalition elites stood in their path. These weren't just any guards. These were hand-picked killers, genetically enhanced, cybernetically augmented, and trained for war. At their center stood a woman clad in sleek black combat armor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight braid, and her expression was cool, calculating. Lyra recognized her immediately. Commander Saria Dorn, her father's right hand. Dorn's icy blue eyes locked onto Lyra. "Going somewhere." Lyra's pulse quickened. She had fought alongside Dorn before, years ago, back when she still believed in the Coalition's cause. The woman was ruthless in combat. Elias muttered, "I'm guessing she's not here for a friendly chat." Dorn's lips curved into a humorless smirk. "Orders are to bring you in alive." She flicked a glance at Elias. Him, not so much. The elites raised their weapons. Lyra's mind raced. Fighting Dorn head-on was suicide, but she wasn't going to let her father's lapdog take her prisoner. Elias, ever the soldier, was already raising his gun. "I'm not going down easy." Lyra smirked. Wouldn't have it any other way. Then she threw a flash grenade. The corridor exploded in blinding light. Lyra and Elias moved as one, using the moment of distraction to break into a sprint. Shots rang out behind them as the elites fired blindly, but they were already moving. They burst into the reactor control chamber, a vast room of humming energy coils and glowing containment fields. The ship's power core pulsed at the center, a swirling mass of blue-white plasma. Lyra darted to the main console, hacking into the controls. I just need a minute. Elias spun to cover her, weapon at the ready. We don't have a minute. Because Dorn was already here. The commander strode through the doors, her elites flanking her. She was fast, too fast, closing the distance in a blur. Elias fired, but Dorn was already moving. She sidestepped, her armor absorbing the impact of a grazing shot. In a flash, she was on him. Elias barely had time to react before her fist slammed into his ribs. The impact sent him flying into a console. He gritted his teeth, rolling to absorb the blow, but pain flared through his side. Dorn loomed over him. You're tough, she admitted, but outmatched. Elias spat blood onto the floor. Yeah. He grinned. So was your aim. He detonated a shock charge. Electricity arced through Dorn's armor, sending her staggering backward. Lyra seized the moment. She overloaded the reactor. The ship's alarms screamed to life. Warning, core instability detected. Emergency evacuation protocol engaged. Dorn's expression darkened. You're insane. Lyra grinned. Yeah, I get that a lot. Dorn lunged for her. But Elias was faster. He tackled her, slamming her into the ground just long enough for Lyra to finish the hack. The containment fields ruptured. Energy surged through the chamber. The walls shook. The floor buckled. Dorn snarled, but she knew they had won. You won't make it off this ship, she spat. Lyra smirked. Watch me. She grabbed Elias's hand. And they ran. They sprinted through the chaos as the ship collapsed around them. Explosions rocked the halls. Security forces fled for the escape pods. Emergency lights flickered as power failed. They reached the docking bay just as a squad of coalition soldiers tried to block their path. Elias raised his rifle. I'll clear a way. Lyra held up a hand. No need. She activated her wrist console and remotely triggered their ship's weapons. The hangar bay erupted as laser cannons obliterated the enemy defenses. Elias blinked. You could have done that sooner. Lyra grinned. Where's the fun in that? They boarded their ship, sealing the hatch behind them. Lyra jumped into the pilot's seat, fingers dancing over the controls. Elias strapped in beside her. Punch it. She didn't hesitate. The engines roared, and they launched into the void, just as the ironclad exploded behind them, a supernova of fire and plasma. Lyra let out a breathless laugh. Well, that was fun. Elias shook his head. Your definition of fun is deeply concerning. She turned to him. We have the data, she said. We have proof my father is working with the Threxians. He's going to know we're coming for him now. Elias smirked. Good. Lyra's golden eyes burned with determination. Then let's end this. Lyra and Elias stood on the bridge of their stolen ship, staring at the star map that displayed their final destination, Veylan Prime. It was a fortress world, the heart of Admiral Stellan Veylan's power. If they wanted to expose him, if they wanted to end this, they would have to go straight to the lion's den. Elias exhaled, arms crossed. Storming an admiral's personal stronghold with just the two of us? Sounds like a death wish. Lyra smirked. Then it's a good thing we made some friends. With a flick of her wrist, she activated the ship's long-range comms. Seconds later, a holographic display flickered to life, revealing Corin, their reptilian informant from Argus Station. His emerald scales gleamed under dim lighting, and his sharp eyes studied them with amusement. Well, he drawled. Back so soon. Don't tell me you actually survived that insane stunt on Hekros 7. Lyra grinned. Surprised? Corin chuckled. Mildly. But I assume you're not calling just to gloat. She leaned forward. We have the proof. We know Stellan Veylan is working with the Threxians. We have records of his deals, shipments, the quantum destabilizer. Corin's amusement faded. You mean to tell me the Coalition was about to hand a planet killer to our enemies? Elias nodded. And they're going to keep covering it up unless we force their hand. Corin was silent for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, he rubbed his scaled jaw. You two are going to get me killed. Lyra smirked. Only if we fail. Corin let out a hissing laugh. Fine. I'll put the word out. Every pirate, mercenary, and information broker in the system is about to know what your dear father has been up to. Lyra nodded. Good. Because we're taking this fight straight to him. Corin's eyes gleamed. I do love a good revolution. The arrival at Veylan Prime was anything but subtle. By the time they dropped out of hyperspace, the entire system was in chaos. Corin had done his job. Word of the Admiral's treachery had spread like wildfire. The Coalition was scrambling, desperate to contain the damage. And as Lyra and Elias approached the heavily fortified Veylan command station, their ship's sensors picked up an incoming fleet. Elias swore. The Threxians. They're here. Lyra clenched her jaw. Of course her father would have called them in. The comms crackled. A cold, familiar voice filled the cockpit. This is Admiral Stellan Veylan. Lyra, if you surrender now, I might consider sparing your life. Lyra smirked, activating the comm. Funny. I was about to offer you the same deal. A pause. Then laughter. Still so bold, her father mused. But this is over. The Coalition is already erasing the evidence. You've lost. Lyra's golden eyes burned. We'll see. She cut the transmission and turned to Elias. We need to get this data to the Coalition High Command. If we can broadcast it before my father's people erase it, they'll have no choice but to act. Elias nodded. Then let's make sure that happens. He took the turrets, while Lyra piloted. The ship weaved and twisted through enemy fire as they closed in on the command station. Fighters pursued them, laser fire slicing through space. Elias took out two before shouting, We won't last long out here. Lyra gritted her teeth. Then we won't stay? She dived toward the station, pushing the engines to their limits. The external defenses blazed with fire, but she barrel-rolled through, skimming dangerously close to the hull. Hold on. She crashed straight into the docking bay, landing hard. The ship screeched to a halt. Elias groaned. Next time, warn me before you do that. Lyra smirked, already unbuckling. Where's the fun in that? Inside the station, chaos reigned. Security forces were already scrambling to contain the rebellion brewing outside. Lyra and Elias fought their way through the corridors, plasma fire blazing. They took cover behind walls, taking out guards one by one. They reached the broadcast center, sealing the doors behind them. Lyra hacked into the mainframe, inserting the data chip. The files loaded, and the station's communication relays activated. The evidence went galactic-wide. Every major coalition world, every outpost, every fleet. They all saw the truth. The recordings, the deals, the planet killer. And they saw Admiral Stellan Veylan's betrayal. The moment the transmission ended, the station shook. Elias cursed. The Threxians are firing on us. Lyra grabbed her weapon. Then let's go see my father. They found him in the command center, standing before a massive holomap of the battlefield. He didn't turn as they entered. I should have killed you years ago, he said quietly. Lyra aimed her gun at his back. Too bad you didn't. Stellan turned slowly, his golden eyes unreadable. You think this changes anything? The Coalition will come for you, Lyra said. They can't ignore the truth anymore. Her father exhaled, shaking his head. They don't want truth, Lyra. They want control. He reached for his weapon, and Elias shot him first. The Admiral staggered, clutching his wounded side. He sank to his knees, blood seeping through his uniform. Lyra stared at him, heart hammering. This was the man who had raised her, the man who had betrayed her. Now he was just another dying officer. He chuckled weakly. You think you've won? Lyra took a step closer, lowering her gun. No. She met his fading gaze. But I think you've lost. Stellan's breath hitched, then stopped. The great Admiral Stellan Veylan was gone. Outside, the battle was over. With the truth exposed, the Threxians had retreated, betrayed by the very man they had allied with. Coalition forces, forced into action, had begun restoring order. The war was far from over. But a new fight had begun. As Lyra and Elias stood in the wreckage of the command station, watching the stars beyond, Elias sighed. So what now? Lyra smiled. We build something better. She reached out a hand. Elias took it. Together, they stepped into the unknown, ready to fight for the future.